would say politically or ideologically, any identification that correlates or relates to the EU, the European Union, I would distance myself from. I don't have any attachments to the EU itself. Although culturally speaking, I do think and I do consider Serbia as part of Europe. Serbia is both geographically and culturally and historically an essential part of Europe, and as is any other European part, it's a formative part of European culture and the culture of Europe. I wouldn't turn it into an adjective European culture. I would, let's say, consider myself as part of Europe. I wouldn't, let's say, European is already prone to being interpreted twofold. So let's say European in a political sense, no, but in a cultural sense, yes. That would have to be the moving to Austria and commencing with my bachelor studies, where I simply had the chance to meet many people, to interact with many people, many of my colleagues, many people who are from Austria, who are from Europe, who are not from Europe. It gave me the first opportunity to meet people from completely different parts of the world and to at least attempt to comprehend the differences that exist, the cultural differences that condition the present world as it is today. And the very fact that I had the opportunity to attain this experience during my, let's say, the days of my youth, so since the age of from the age of 19 until the age of, well, until now, until the age of 26, um, is without a doubt um, something that is formative and that gave me a reason to appreciate certain things that do exist in Europe and that do make one's life, and in my particular case, one's education, far more interesting, easier, and simply fun. Well, the first thing that comes to mind would be the failure to respond to the crisis caused by the pandemic of COVID-19 and the disunity that arose concerning particular countries themselves and the difference and the general, let's say, disarray that arose as a consequence of this disunity. Um, the failure to respond to the COVID pandemic, I have my own certain beliefs as to why it came to that, but I would say that this, at this particular moment, would be the, let's say, the worst moment in recent European history. And I won't go into analysis of any other potentially worse moments, but this will be my answer. The same problem arises as with the worst. I would have to enter an analytical approach to take into retrospective. In my mind, the valid candidate for that would be the fall of the Berlin Wall. But then again, the problem with that, it's not really recent. It's 32 years ago for that matter. And at the same time, it has been disproven as not a particularly beneficial one to Serbia. So again, I'm inclined to take the perspective of someone who thinks as someone from Serbia and not as a European. So um, it would, let's say, the Berlin Wall, but even that is contested as it's been immediately disproven by the following wars in among other countries in Serbia as well as the countries in the region. Well, it goes back to the second question, the opportunity to have an education, to have an extensive cultural exchange, to to an extent, be able to integrate into Austria and Germany, both societies being relatively similar. But if we're to think in European terms, to integrate into the system of functioning within Europe, is probably the most important thing that the EU has done for me, just with the fact alone that I was, first of all, able to do it, but secondly, that I was able to notice, um, first the differences and then consequentially the similarities of myself and Europe, but then at the very end to find a solution that is my own individual um, mode of existence in the EU, which doesn't which negates neither the Serbian aspect of my own well-being nor the European aspects of it. So, and also at the same time, one cannot but not mention traveling, which enabled me to see far more of the continent than I ever would have been able to had I stick to Serbia and to the region of the Balkan Peninsula. Just being in Austria enables one to shift between Czech Republic, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Germany, all neighboring countries, all relatively close by and all relatively accessible, which um, doesn't only end there, it stretches also to Belgium. And I simply managed to travel quite a lot. And that's, in my eyes, something to be undoubtedly eternally thankful for. Well, I'm inclined to think idealistically now, so I will willingly do so. Um, Number one, I think, would be the resolution of the refugee crisis that is based on sustainability and on political practicality for all sides, as well as for the benefit of all sides. It doesn't include such categories as compassion and emotion. I think that the problem is far more complicated than to be reduced to simple emotional measures and the feeling of guilt. I think that the problem of refugees has to be resolved um, in a far more let's say, um, all-encompassing strategy. Um, I think that Europe, as a second point that I think should deserve change, I think Europe requires a deep um, internal, let's say, political re-examination of itself and political examination of its own backyard. And also, I think this, to an extent, with my own vague knowledge of politics and of economy and the military, I believe that Europe should reduce its participation in foreign affairs that concern parts of the world where there is currently war. And as a, let's say, a third answer, I will not provide as to what I would like the EU to have achieved by 2030, but what I would like the EU not to achieve by 2030. And at this point, I think that the worst thing for Serbia that could happen to Serbia is to access the EU. And I have certain reasons for it that I won't go into here. They're not even that personal. They're of a purely, I think, of a purely economical manner. Um, but yes, I do think that I hope that Serbia will still remain unadmitted to the EU by 2030.